Thresholds, doors, crossing one to go through another. The opportunities we are given, refuse, embrace, or walk away from. I will forever be grateful that my family and I crossed the threshold of the North Chapel, walking into a space of welcome and joy on a Sunday more than 20 years ago. That day, I listened to a minister who actually touched my heart for the first time in years. And when I heard Spirit of Life, I knew I was home. My name is Mary Jean Taylor, and one of the many gifts I receive from our church are the stories of your lives. And so on this morning of winter delights, when much of 2021 lays at our feet, waiting for the upcoming journey, I hope you won't mind if I share a bit of my story and the doors of my life. Welcome, then, to this virtual Sunday service of the North Chapel of Woodstock, Vermont, on this 21st day of February. I am so glad that you are here. It was a favorite phrase of my mother's when I was a kid and was acting up, either walking funny, talking silly, or making a crazy face. Mary Jean, stop that this instant, or God may strike you like that. Try as she might, that empty threat did little to persuade me, my sister, or my 3 brothers to behave the way she would have preferred. Inasmuch as it makes me smile, thinking of my beloved mom chastising me, it also speaks very much to the religion and church I was brought up in, where God, at that point in my life, was to be awed, revered, even feared, and no questions were to be asked. It was all about religion and rules with no thought of spirituality. Catholicism was a very important part of my parents' life, one they passed on, or tried to their 5 children with great fervor and intent. I know that when I told them I was leaving the church, their hearts broke a bit. As I told them then, and I will ever believe, I am thankful for the hope, faith, and love they instilled in me, as it continues to serve as the base of my own spirituality. And while they wondered, I know, how they failed, I, on the other hand, will always be grateful for the path they helped me begin toward finding my own heart's truth. It took a long time for me to recognize that the Roman Catholic Church was not the place for me, and until that happened, I was incredibly active in my tiny church over here on the other side of the ledges, and I pulled the whole family along with me. It was the tenacity of my eldest child, my Ross, now 37, that brought about a huge change for me and all the Taylors. As he prepared to be confirmed in the Catholic Church, Ross had to write an essay to say why he wanted to do so. And he came to us and said he didn't want to be confirmed, that he didn't buy the whole shtick, that he believed in Darwinism and not God. So with our blessing, he wrote all that in his essay. Imagine the CCD teacher reading that. Sadly, instead of having a conversation with my son, the teacher used his red ink and big letters to write, "If you want to be confirmed, you will have to rewrite this essay." A defining moment, a threshold. This one taking me out a door. After years of disagreeing with most of what the church stood for, but being, I think, afraid to leave, afraid to hurt my parents, afraid to lose an extension of the small community I called home, I could no longer stay. Our family left the little Catholic church in Bethel and began what I fondly call our missionary summer, when we visited all kinds of churches in the Upper Valley. And in the tradition of the best of stories, we found some were too hot, some too cold, some hard, some soft. But this one, this North Chapel, was just right. This North Chapel, place of light and love, has soothed my soul and filled my head and heart ever since. It is a church I am so proud to be a part of, a church that truly believes the words, "All are welcome here." A church that values every person who steps over our threshold, even during these times when we cannot tell you so in person. I love our North Chapel and all that it stands for. I love Leon. I love Diane, the music, the musicians. I love sharing services, both virtually and someday again in person, with people who love our church too and believe in our 7 principles. Even though I do not know all of you well, the fact that each of us once chose to walk through that front door of the North Chapel or join in this service today binds us together, because here we have found a space and time that we value. No matter our story, here we are one. So welcome in, dear friend, and thanks for listening. Let's sing, shall we? Our opening hymn is Peace Like a River.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and here I am in the very snowy and ice-covered snow of the woods of South Pomfret, Vermont. A mid-February day, moving on toward late February, and I'm thinking of my mother, who would have had a birthday. She's been gone for many years, but her birthday would have been on February 22nd. And the memory of my mother is of how she looked out for me, wondering if each of you can think now of someone who looked out for you when you were young, or even a relationship with an animal, with a pet, that feeling of being cared for by another being. This poem is called Mom's Dreams. The worst, she said, were when she had to choose 1 out of 4, watch the other children drown. She said this lightly, as the two of us picnicked in a maple's waving shadows on grass fresh and clean as a new beginning, as we drove cross-country that summer. She let me choose that trip's motels, the Teddy Bear my favorite. She sometimes let me steer, throw quarters in the toll basket, or nap, my head heavy on her soft lap as she smoked, filling the ashtray with lipsticked filters, while I savored the familiar acrid scent. I don't know if either of us sensed she did save me from the drowning depths of Dad's rage, older sister's mayhem, or what either of us might have done differently if we had known her love could save only one of us. Hurry, come here. Come here, guys.
Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. My name is Leon Dunkley, and I minister here at North Universalist Chapel Society, or North Chapel, here in Woodstock, Vermont. It's good to be together. Today is Sunday, February the 21st, and the title of this morning's reflection is actually a question. Is the threshold of American serenity made of kryptonite? You might remember that kryptonite is that material from another planet that weakened the superhero, Superman. So, if it were actually possible, I would never leave the garden. I would never leave serenity. I would just live here forever among the flowers and the growing vegetables. Even now, with all the snow outside, I would live in the garden with the kale and the squash and the sunflowers. I know that I'd look funny out there, especially at this time of year, but I'd still do it. Even though some might laugh at me, I would live in the garden the whole year round. Most of my dear friends, my soul friends, my friends of spirit, they would understand me and why I was there. They would understand right from the start, and they would join me there if they could. Almost every last one of them. In fact, the only ones who wouldn't join me in the garden would be the ones who were already living in their own. My teachers, my guides, I love them so. They would understand. They would know what I was doing, and it wouldn't be new to them. It wouldn't be lost to them. They would be showing me the way. They would be wise enough. They would be living in the gardens themselves. But, not everyone has this inclination. Some of us don't live in gardens. Some of us make fun of those who do. Those are the ones who think I'm crazy for bunking down with the broccoli and with the Brussels sprouts. And I don't blame them. Anytime you do what you love, you risk being laughed at by those who don't get it. Still, I love these people, even though they don't understand where I'm at. They worry. They are concerned about me. Some of my friends and neighbors are concerned, especially the chatty ones, the ones who like to gossip. They are my favorite people. Those are the ones who just love a good story, and mine would be a juicy one. I would be the low-hanging fruit for them and impossible to resist. So they would talk and chat and gossip. I know, and God love them for it. I would be that way myself, but I've learned to enjoy the silences all around me when I'm not choosing to break those silences myself, rudely, by playing a loud and distorted electric guitar. I love doing that. I love playing guitar, but my cat does not. She hates it. It just goes to show we all find our serenity in different ways. My cat runs away as soon as I pick up the instrument and turn on the amplifier. I felt bad about that at first. I mean, I know she doesn't like it, and I still do it. But then, I started to feel insulted, as if my cat's behavior were the judgment and measure of my self-esteem. Now I know she's just taking care of herself. And she comes back when I stop playing, and when the coast is clear, she climbs back up into my lap and claws me to death. In love, I suppose, or I imagine. Then I know I'm loved, or I believe I am, and I tell her so. I love my cat, Dusty, the cat that I renamed John Lewis after John Lewis passed away last year in July. It seems fitting now that it's February, because February is Black History Month. In a bit, I'll say a little bit more about that. But right now, it's enough to just love on my cat, the one who I've renamed John Lewis. She lives in the garden. She knows where it's at. She thinks the chatty ones are clueless, except when it's snowy or rainy or cold, at which times she thinks they're absolutely right. Dusty John Lewis. She's a really good cat. Bad weather, though, is her kryptonite. She loses all of her superpowers, and she leaves the garden. She stays inside. She won't go out. She climbs under the couch as if licking her wounds. Bad weather is her hidden vulnerability. We all have them. Each of us has an Achilles heel that we don't really like to talk very much about. Not comfortably, anyway. Collectively, we have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability as well. The point of all of this is that we are all vulnerable in one way or another. And at times, and sometimes we're vulnerable in several different ways. We all have weaknesses that are scary hard to reveal, so we hide them and we deny them and we wander from the garden. When we wander from serenity, we feel alone. Now, how does this happen? I think it happens when we lose our sense of meaning. I think it happens when we lose connection with each other. So I don't get it, though. What is the true nature of the garden, this garden that we're talking about? What is the value of serenity? I think this has a two-part answer. The first part is theology, and the second part is music. The first part of the answer is about the nature of the garden and the value of serenity. The first part of this answer comes to us from a book called Saving Paradise, a book that was written by Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock, two of my teachers, my leaders in California during seminary. They believe that it is possible for all of us to live in the Garden of Serenity right now. They believe that this Garden of Serenity is paradise. In their book, Saving Paradise, they explain that as far back as the 4th century, Christians believed that paradise was not only created on earth once long ago, but that it is still here. They say that it is right here and with us. They say that a Christian saint named Ephraim affirmed that paradise is earth here and now, even in the midst of injustice, violence, and suffering. Now, learning to see with eyes like that, that's difficult. It's hard to dare to look in the midst of injustice and violence and suffering, to dare to look for paradise. It's hard, but we can do it. We can do it if we try. I know we can, based on what our own bodies have already experienced in life, based on what our hearts are already longing for, based on what our souls already know. Look at it this way. Clearly, this has been a long, long winter. One can argue easily that this year's winter began in the middle of March of last year, when the global pandemic changed all of our lives. But even now, we know that the warmth of spring will soon return. We know deeply somehow that the coming of spring is a symbol of new life, of rebirth, of growth, of health and prosperity. Springtime is both a symbol and a true experience of new life. It is the return of paradise, the miracle of life that has never left us, that never lets us go. It is the sacredness of life that never leaves and does not end, not even at the end of life, not if we are open to that which is best within us. The best of life becoming possible. This best in us, this perpetual possibility, is the breath of life. They call it Ruach in the Old Testament. They call it Eden. They call it paradise. Parker and Brock remind us that Christians in Ephraim's time, in 4th century Christians, they believed that Jesus had reopened paradise. He broke through the threshold somehow. You see, paradise was closed. It had been closed. Its boundaries could not be crossed, not after the snake and the apple led Eve and Adam astray. According to Scripture, Genesis said that the gates were closed when Adam and Eve sinned and were banished from the Garden of Eden. Christian Testament writings said that by his birth, teachings, healing, and resurrection, Jesus returned to the garden. He opened the gates and he invited us back in according to Scripture. Parker reminds us to look deeply at all of this, not to think magically about it, but critically. She asks us to take note of what is missing from the list. Parker said, by his birth, teachings, healing, and resurrection, Jesus opened the gates of paradise to all who wanted to enter it, end quote. She did not say by his death. The way she tells the story removes the kryptonite for me. It removes the violence that scares my soul to death. I appreciate the absence of this kryptonite, the downplay of the fear factor, as it were. As I shared 2 weeks ago, I grew up being really quite fearful of death. I'm not unique, of course. But there was an added dimension of fear for me because I was raised in a Black family in a predominantly white environment. I wasn't afraid of my neighbors. They were basically lovely people. I was afraid of the kryptonite. I was afraid of vulnerability and weakness that might somehow lead to death. Because I remember learning about Martin Luther King, and I remember learning about Malcolm X, and I remember learning about Medgar Evers and Jimmy Lee Jackson and Viola Luisa. I remember learning about Goodman and Schwimmer and Cheney, and I remember learning about Emmett Till. Emmett Till was the 14-year-old city boy who grew up outside in Chicago, actually, and he went to Mississippi in 1955 to visit family. Before daybreak on the morning of August the 28th, Emmett Till was stolen from that family. He was mocked, and he was beaten, and he was killed. And his young body was disposed of in the Tallahatchie River, dropped into its waters from the Black Bayou Bridge in the town of Glendora in Mississippi. He did not float. The killers saw to that. They weighed him. They weighed him down. Emmett Till was made to sink, his body having been tied to a heavy fan of 70 pounds, a fan that the killers had lifted from a nearby cotton gin. I was 7 years old or so when I first heard about Emmett Till. By the time I was 14 years old myself, the age that Emmett was when he died, I could not yet fathom the tragedy. I am 55 years old today. I will be 56 in May. And I promise you, I still don't understand. I never will. I remember first learning about Dr. King and first learning about Malcolm X and about Medgar and Jimmy Lee and Judas and Jesus. And I remember first learning about Mary's broken heart. None of this learning kindled in me a desire to search for paradise. I and my kind were expelled from the garden completely. That there could be no doubt, or so I thought, until I realized that Ephraim was right. The threshold of serenity, the garden gate of paradise, is not composed of violence, but of love. Just ask Mary's broken heart, and she will tell you the threshold of serenity is made of love. So that's the first part of the answer to the questions that we raised about the nature and the value of the garden. The second part of the answer comes from the music of David Wilcox, a good guitarist, a good-hearted minister, and a friend I've never met. In a song called Love Will Show the Way, he writes, "You say you see no hope, and you say you see no reason that we should dream that the world will ever change. And when you're saying that love is foolish to believe because there'll always be some crazy with an army or a knife to wake you from your daydream and put the fear back in your life. Here, the nature of the garden is a dream we have awake, a dream that only looks like it can be shattered with wayward armies and scary weapons, a dream that only looks like it can be shattered by fear. As it turns out, this is not the case. The dream is not so fragile after all. And it can be further strengthened by love, by fearless love, by tough love, by real love. David continues plainly. He says, look, if someone wrote a play just to glorify what's stronger than hate, would they not arrange the stage to look as if the hero came too late? Now, he's almost in defeat, and when it's looking like the evil side will win, on the edge of every seat, from the moment that the whole thing begins, it is love that mixed the mortar, and it is love that stacked these stones. And it is love that made the stage here, though it looks like we're alone. And in this scene, set in shadow, like the night is here to stay, there is evil cast around us, but it's love that wrote the play. And in this darkness, love will show the way. Fearlessly, we can love the garden into being whenever we wish. That part is easy. The hard part comes in weeding out the kryptonite. Violence is to the garden, to the dream of paradise, just like a kind of kryptonite. Violence is to the gate, to the threshold of serenity, a sign that reads no trespass. You don't count. You do not matter. In a PBS documentary called American Reckoning, host Judy Woodruff interviewed a journalist named George Packer. He writes for The Atlantic. Over the last 10 years or so, he's been writing about a collapse in the heartland of our country. The collapse of traditional sources of authority and meaning, as he says. The American church is in crisis. The unions are falling down. The local newspapers are owned and operated by corporate moguls who do not live nearby. They don't live in the area. And the hardest thing about all of this is there's no one there to tell the tale. No one is writing the beautiful story about what's been going on. And by the word beautiful, I mean the kind of story that speaks gently to the better angels of our nature, the kind of story that speaks boldly to the braver angels of the world. I have to find a way, we have to find a way to steel our spine, to strengthen up our backbone. Because something is breaking in the heartland, and that's the kryptonite. Something is threatening the garden, and we must pay attention to it. Something is breaking in what we once thought of as the heart and the backbone of our country. George Packer says that around 10 years ago in his reporting, he began to notice that in these small towns in rural areas that were sort of overlooked by the media, there was a collapse of traditional sources of authority and meaning. The church, the union, the company, the newspaper, the political party, those were gone. People were looking for an identity, a narrative, and they were looking for villains. In the heartland of our country, we are desperate and we are hungry. Hungry for power, hungry for meaning, and opportunistic leaders who are willing to exploit this moment in history are having a field day. We are a target-rich environment, but only when we choose to stand apart from one another. Only when we imagine ourselves as separate and alone. This is so easy to do today. To be honest, I've been quite worried about it. I was worried until I came across this prayer. It was this: if in your soul you are worrying about something that you cannot change, then stop worrying and find your peace with it. And if in your soul you are worrying about something and you can change it, then stop worrying it and be the change that you want to see in the world. Substitute not beauty, but balance where worrisome anxiety had been. Please no one but yourself for a few moments. Love and pray with deep humility. Now that prayer sounds like the Garden of Serenity to me. I want to live in that garden, but it's complicated, especially when we're estranged from one another, and that's the kryptonite again. It's hurting us. It keeps hurting us. It doesn't only weaken Superman, it weakens the heroic energy in all of us. It seals off the beloved community, the Garden of Eden, the paradise. It dulls the beauty of the earth and the spirit of life. Now, when I was 7, I had a heroic dream within me. We lived in Queens, New York, and my parents bought me this Superman costume, and I wore it all the time, morning, noon, and night. I slept in it. I woke in it. I rose in it. I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I did not take off my Superman costume. I believed I could fly. In fact, I'm sure that I leapt from the furniture on several occasions that would have worried my parents immensely into the air, only to find that my theory of flight was false and I fell to the floor. I loved Superman. Back in the early 70s, at the time I was still enthralled, there was an organization in Manhattan called BOCA, B-O-C-A. That was the Black-Owned Communications Alliance. They created a newspaper advertisement and a magazine ad that actually absolutely blew my mind. The ad featured a powerful picture above a banner headline that raised a question. It asked, "What is wrong with this picture?" So let's go ahead and for a moment and take a look at the ad. Beneath the banner headline, there was some text, and the text read, "A child dreams of being the latest superhero. What could be wrong with that? Plenty if the child is black and cannot even imagine a hero of the same color he or she is. It's like this. Children learn from what they can see. I was a little boy back then looking into the mirror and dreaming, wearing a Superman costume that I wore until I wore it out, and then tucking a towel into my shirt, into my collar to make a makeshift cape once the costume was finally gone from me. I looked into the mirror and thought myself the man of steel. I pretended that I could fly, although by then I'd learned my lesson. I didn't pretend that I was white, but I did believe that all superheroes were. It was the 1970s. It was a time when there was such pride in black firsts. The first black gunner in World War II, the first black baseball player in the major leagues, the first black opera singer, tennis star, golfer, mayor, or member of Congress, the first black president or vice president, the first black superhero. What can I say? Kids of all angels, we learn by what we see. Racism in our time is a kind of kryptonite. Separation is a kind of kryptonite. Fearful estrangement from ourselves, from one another, is kryptonite. It weakens the heroic energy in all of us. It keeps us from believing that we can fly. It killed the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in Memphis, Malcolm X in New York City, Medgar Evers in Jackson, Tennessee, and Bob Dylan wrote a song about it. In more recent times, it has killed George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Nina Pop, and Tony McDade, Eric Garner and Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, just as it did Jimmy Lee Jackson and Emmett Till back in 1955. But the question is this: will we allow this madness to close the gates of serenity for us? Will violence mark the threshold of the Garden of Eden, or will we embrace a brand new day in the soul because the morning star still rises, whether or not we hold it in our arms, whether or not we've had our morning coffee? It still rises. The evolution of culture is happening. The revolution of the soul goes on within us. Spirit is ever unfolding. It's an ongoing process, and we are its flowers. Sun keeps rising in the world and within us, in the east and within each of us. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is breaking in the soul. Spirit that is ever unfolding in 1,000 different ways, and all of these that it's unfolding like sun risings in each of us, reminding us of all that is possible in life. May we reach for the better and for the braver angels of our nature. May we nurture to lovely hero that childlike energy that lives within. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
He will He